Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be talking about the latest firmware update of the original Lumix S5, which they have a firmware update 2.9 back in July 29 for 2025. So that's 5 years later, they're still putting on a firmware update for the S5. And I didn't think too much about it because it didn't have too much information on the descriptions of the 2.9 firmware updates. When I looked at the website, it basically just says two descriptions. The first one is enhanced security of products, and the second one is improve operational stability. So honestly, it just doesn't make too much sense, but looking back on it, they should have added more details because this firmware update does have two key improvements that the S5 really needed. So especially when I compared the S5 to the S5 II, because I did have my hands on the S5 II back in December, I noticed that the IBIS was so much better than the original S5. And although the S5 still beats the other brands, the S5 II stabilization is basically top notch. It's almost gimbal-like when it comes to handheld stabilization. When it comes to the E stabilization high, it just makes it even better. But when it comes to the firmware update 2.9 for the S5, they practically are hand-to-hand right now when it comes to the IBIS stabilization, aside from the E high stabilization that the S5 II has. So that means that even if I'm hand-holding my S5, it's almost like I'm still using a gimbal. When I'm rotating my camera onto a subject, it's just super smooth. The other thing is that the autofocus actually improved on the S5 again. And I know that they did improve it a lot a couple of years ago when it comes to static subjects like this thing here. But honestly, when it comes to talking heads like this, even if the subject moves around back and forward like this and left and right, like even if it's like a meter of turning around, moving around, it's still able to keep the subject sticky enough with the autofocus system. Now you remember putting on the autofocus settings at +5 for the speed and +3 for the sensitivity. So I'm pretty sure those things help as well, because right now I'm using at 4K 30 frames per second at 180 degrees. But obviously, like, it really did improve it. So it's more reliable now when it comes to the autofocus, even though it uses depth from the focus, which is contrast based. Which is one thing that I really like about the S5 compared to the S5 II actually, is that when it comes to the full HD at 60 frames per second, it has enough information to keep the autofocus really reliable when it comes to slow motion scenes. Because it's using 1/125th of the shutter speed when it comes to, like, let's say 180 degrees at 60 frames per second, and it has enough information to gather to keep the autofocus sticky. So it's something that I really like, especially when it comes to the full HD at 60 frames per second. It's still using the full frame coverage and it doesn't have any crop like 1.5 like the S5 II. But obviously with the new S1 II, it doesn't have any crop much when it comes to 60 frames per second either. So I mean, if you have the money for it, then go for it. But if you're going on a budget and you want to do more slow motion, it's much better to use the S5 when it comes to full HD at 60 frames per second. But aside from that, I still think the S5 II is a better camera overall compared to the original S5. So nonetheless, these two things are really noteworthy when it comes to the latest firmware update of the S5. So even though we're at the year 2026, it's still noteworthy to have, and it makes the S5 still a valid camera this year.